Welcome to the Legion Strength and Conditioning Podcast. You can check us out at legionsc.com or follow us on Instagram at legion.sc.
Welcome to the Legion Strength and Conditioning Podcast. We are without Todd this week, which is a little bit different.
Yes.
No parents, no rules. So you have two bumbling Britishmen going over the life cycle of a CrossFit athlete, how to structure your training potentially once you exit group class scenarios, when to do that, and then also looking at the sort of seasonal structure that has come about with the new game season, the new sort of CrossFit game season, and then how to navigate through that. So first thing we'll talk about is just going into this is the usual route that people take is going from a group class setting and then going into some form of competitive training, essentially just because they start to enjoy it, they start to realize that they might have some potential in the sport, and then they start to up the volume and do what most people usually do, which is take it a little bit more seriously. Very rarely you find people who are coming through, apart from what's his name? Hunter McIntyre.
Yeah.
Very rarely you find people just coming straight in and being like, okay, cool, I'm gonna make it to the games. I think I do remember a couple of like people in the weightlifting world and the powerlifting world. So I think AJ Roberts, who was like a powerlifter from Westside Barbell, I think he tried to do some sort of social media thing where he was vlogging about him trying to make it to the CrossFit Games and, you know, go from the strongest person in the world to the fittest person in the world. And I think the same with Jared Fleming as well. I think he's a weightlifter. Mm-hmm. But yeah, very rarely you finding people sort of trying to make the switch and go straight into very high level competitive CrossFit. And I think that is generally a good thing because it makes their training a little bit more progressive. And it also just means that people who are involved in the sport are those people who are actually enjoying it as well. But yeah, John, tell us a little bit about when you think someone should start moving from a group class scenario, and what are the sort of telltale signs that they should start doing something a bit extra.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's important to have that initial kind of group class activity, or at least working with a coach in person, because, you know, having someone who is, let's say, training by themselves, following their own individualized program, but if they don't have a lot of experience in working out, they're likely going to struggle with some of the technique requirements and could basically end up doing more harm than good, starting off just doing their own program by themselves. So I think it's important for people to initially be in that group setting, and to get that, you know, live feedback from a coach and get that basically feedback every day on what they're doing, if they're doing the right thing, if they're moving the right way. After that, I think it comes down to when, you know, what do they want from their training? Are they training to compete in CrossFit? Are they training just to improve their health and wellness? Are they doing some sport outside of CrossFit that they want to improve their ability at? At that stage, they can start to look to specialize their training. And that's where that kind of individual training program comes into play, where it's a situation of, okay, I need to really improve my gymnastics if I want to be competitive in CrossFit. And doing the group class program is not going to get me there right now.
Yeah, with that, I think that it's quite important as well, understanding what you have access to, because there's a lot of people out there that I personally worked with who just don't have access to good coaching, and to sort of to take their training to the level they want to. You know, I come across quite a lot of people who are in CrossFit classes and they are potentially just as qualified as the CrossFit coach and potentially have been doing it for longer. So for instance, that hands-on coaching doesn't necessarily, it's not as effective as they would like it to be. Sure. But I do think that, yeah, having that group setting is really important. and then also just understanding the different options and different routes that are available to you once you leave that. And I think that you have obviously remote coaching as one route. You can sort of go down blog programming, which is what most people do, whether this can be free or paid. You can join a sort of like a group program online, so like a group community. But then I think one of the biggest ones that is quite effective is just training with other competitors, and I think that that's something that a lot of people miss. I know for me personally, like training with a group of people does allow me to sort of push the intensity a little bit more, and you do see it with groups of competitors out there from certain gyms across the globe where they are doing well, because there's almost this sort of culture that is bred in there, and it's sort of almost like a team sport atmosphere, and it does push the intensity. It does sort of create another level of feedback. But at the same time, you could sort of associate them a little bit with something similar to the Bulgarian weightlifting system, where it just screws people up and just chews people up, and throws them out, and then they end up either just becoming burnt out or injured or something like that. So yeah, I think it's important understanding some key things like training age as well. Like there's obviously people that come into the sport, might do it for 6 months, but because they've got a hefty training experience before them, they can adapt fairly quickly and pick up things quite well. And then before you know it, they're sort of advancing and they're hitting the best scores in classes, and then they're trying to get into competitions. And that's something I think you see quite often. I mean, I work with a few people who have sort of just made a switch from like endurance sports, and they tend to just operate really well and tolerate quite a high volume of training, and they were not getting enough from classes. And then the first thing that they wanted to do, because they had that endurance training background, was, okay, how can I fit more of this in, and how can I do more of this? And it was like an hour of open gym plus an hour of class, and then eventually it's just they've gone down the sort of individual route, being told that they need to get stronger.
So let's kind of talk more about the longevity of an athlete in terms of what people can expect to be able to maintain for their training. Because a lot of people that we see, they come into like the competitive CrossFit world and they pretty quickly find themselves maybe injured, or maybe they're not able to sustain the training volume required to be a competitive athlete. And competitive within the CrossFit world. So do you think there's a limit to how long someone can train at a certain volume or intensity or whatever is required to be that level of competitive athlete?
I think this is an interesting one, because we are starting to see now people drop off out of the sport who have been involved in it for quite a long time, but we're also seeing people who are still pushing the envelope and still pushing into, they're claiming that they're still maxing out, hitting new numbers and PRing on, endurance metrics and things like that, whilst they are 8 to 10 years into CrossFit and they've carried on just going through the same process. I think that you are starting to find out that there's definitely some early adopters of CrossFit who are very, very gifted and have just been able to handle that and tolerate that volume. But then again, I think that what you are seeing as well is quite a high level of burnout. It all comes down pretty much to, I think, what the athlete has done previously, what they're getting into, and how they also start their journey out. So I think a lot of people mess themselves up by literally just piling on more CrossFit and just more intensity. And they don't necessarily have the training base to do that. Whereas if, say, for instance, someone has gone through a very, you could say, just more measured approach where they've done, some linear strength work, they've done some basic endurance training, now they're starting to mix it up with some CrossFit and some intensity, and, they're working with a coach who's now identifying those areas that need a lot more specific work. Those people can obviously be in a position where they're able to handle training for a lot more. But I think overall, the biggest thing to understand is that it's very, very cyclical, and that you're not going to be able to take this hard charging style attitude with training all the way through your CrossFit career, or all through your competitive career. There's going to be points where you might have to like roll back a little bit, but then, you know, you've got to take into consideration as well, this isn't really a professional sport that's paying people lots of money. It's actually something that people are paying to do. So a lot of the time, you know, most of the people I see who have been fairly good and fairly gifted in the sport who are now sort of backing out, it's usually people trying to excel in their own sort of professional and personal lives, people who just don't necessarily have the time to do it. They might have families, things like that. So I think there's lots of things to sort of take into account. I don't really think there is a number on it, but I think that you tend to see quite a bit of a drastic dropout rate, probably about 2 years into this style of training, because it just does burn people out. What have you seen?
I mean, if you look at the very top, someone like Froning, who obviously was great as an individual for a while, decided to move into that team arena. But he's still a great athlete. Like, he may not be on the same level as Matt Fraser right now, but he's still, you know, he qualified top 20 in the Open this year, right?
Yeah.
He's, regardless of him doing team over individual, he's still a great athlete, and has been since, maybe 2011, 2010. So, you know, that's 8-9 years at the top of the sport, and I think he's never really had a serious injury. I can't think of a time when he's been out because of injury.
I know he's had some issues with his knees over the last year or so. So I think he did say that he might have like backed off in his training a little bit. But yeah, I mean, he's gone through it, and I think he's also weathered the storm that was like of the, you could say like the 2000 and it was, yeah, probably about 2012, 2013, 14, where just things just like ramped up a hell of a lot. And you just saw a lot of people just dipping out at that stage. And then I think that because I think generally the CrossFit Games was always the same people for the first 5 years or so. And then it started to drop out, people started to drop out, and I think mainly because of age and things like that, but also the games was just getting increasingly more and more difficult, and I think it sort of reached a point in like 2015, 2016 where it just like ended people, like with doing Murph and things like that.
But I think that at that stage it also required a certain training volume, that I think was the kicker. Like, there was a point 2012 where you could get away with like, you know, I'm going to do 90 minutes, 2 hours training a day, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then, like I say, I think when it ramped up, it got to the point where, okay, well, if you're not able to train twice a day, if you're not able to put in like, let's say, 20 hours or 15, 20 hours of training across the week, you're not going to be able to handle what you need to do for the games.
And it became a lot more about, I think, where people were just like, oh yeah, we're just going to go out and like kick it for a weekend at regionals and for the games. It became a lot more sort of professionalized. And then you also noticed that people were treating it a lot more like a job, where I think the sort of grassroots of CrossFit, it was very raw, and people were still enjoying themselves, and, you know, they would just do random shit, whereas people became a lot more measured in their training. And I think that's interesting, is that as it became a lot more measured and people started cottoning on to the fact that like you have to be, following a certain program and things like that, you notice that a lot of people started to dip out of it. And then also the sort of rate of burnout and, you know, people sort of quote unquote quitting after a couple of years of doing it, that became a little bit more significant, because beforehand it was literally just like a, you know, if you're fit and you train twice a day and you're lucky enough to be sort of like genetically gifted and have a good training history, then you're going to sort of do well. Whereas, you know, it became a lot more about having everything switched on, from nutrition to sleep to training and things like that. But yeah, I mean, still now though, you do see sort of an interesting expectations amongst people who are starting out in the sport, and they also, I think what is interesting is people don't view this as like I want to be doing this for the rest of my life. I'm going to transition and I'm going to compete at a master's level, or I'm going to do this. And I think a lot of the time people are just seeing this like, okay, cool, I'm just going to go all in for, a couple of years and, lay it on the line and see what happens. But then again, I think that also restricts people because they just don't give themselves the time and the opportunity to develop over a period of time. And they don't allow themselves to adapt to training over the years and actually just do other things as well. It's almost like this all or nothing attitude.
Yeah. I think adapting to the training volume is important as well. A lot of people jump into that high volume training expecting they're going to be able to hang, but the reality is it's not just get in the gym and do the work. You've got to build up to that. Your body has to build resilience to training volume. And I think, again, going back to kind of elite level, someone like Ben Smith is a great example where he's been there since the early days. He's handling the, he's been in the time when you didn't have to do a lot of volume, but he's also competed at the top level in a time where you did have to be capable of a lot of volume. But he hasn't just jumped into that. He's built that across the 8, 9, 10 years, whatever it is, of being at the games. And I think, again, with him, he's avoided injury until this year. And this year, even after, I don't think he's fully recovered, but even after coming back slightly from injury, he's still kind of off the top. He's off the pace.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I do think he's like a poster boy for the methodology and the fact that like he started out when he was fairly young. Noted that I think he sort of cottoned on to the fact that you can have a bit of a strength bias to your training and prioritize Olympic weightlifting, and that's going to hold you in good stead for the sport. But he started off pretty young, and I think that his sort of development as an athlete has been, you could say probably a little bit more in line with the CrossFit methodology and the sort of, trying to sort of like bring up all areas at the same time, not necessarily biasing your training, but I think is also understanding that CrossFit and what you do in classes usually is not what is required for the sport. And what is required for the sport is like a specialization, which is harmful to the body. And it's, people do think that, and you can see this now as obviously CrossFit is trying to make some sort of like, they're trying to put the competitive side of the sport a little bit at arm's reach because it's not aligned with the methodology and the very sort of like early years, the material and the content that they were putting out and what they're actually trying to do. I think competing, if you do look at competing from this sort of point of view as like, I'm just going to keep getting better and better and better and better, then you're probably going to last a couple of years before you end up just realizing that it doesn't work like that. But at that point, it's probably going to be too late, and you're fed up with everything, and you're what people would call burnt out. I think it's important that people take time off, or they just take time away from it, and they just focus on other things as well. I think what you'll probably start to see now is just like people will dip in and out of it with a different level of commitment. Like for instance, you start to see old CrossFit Games athletes now starting to take things a little bit more seriously and try to go through the new sort of like masters age, the 35 and above. And then, I think the key is trying to make sure that you're doing something that, you're still going to train like this in 10, 20 years time. And you're not going to let the sort of the ups and downs and the journey of a competitive athlete stop you from training, because that's just sad. Put bluntly.
Yeah, I think the ability to take time off and rest is something that a lot of people kind of overlook, and I think a lot of people are going to get screwed with the new CrossFit Games season. They announced whatever it is, 28 sanctioned events. And I think I think there's something like a run of 16 weeks in a row where each weekend there's a different sanctioned event. Once you take into account qualifiers for those events, you've essentially got, well, and add in the open, you've got nearly 60 things that someone could potentially do next year.
Yeah, I mean,
and obviously no one's going to try and do all of them, but you're going to get people who will think, okay, I'm going to try and do like 5 or 6 sanctioned events, which all have a qualifier, and I'm going to do the open. And people are expecting to be able to perform at a high level for 12 weeks, for like 12 events straight. You know, the body's just, the amount of work for each qualifier and for each event, it's not a one-off workout. It's, 6, 7, 8 workouts in a weekend, and you want to do 6 of those events across the space of 3 months. There has to be some level of cyclical nature to the season to give you rest, to give you recovery, to stop that burnout, and to stop injury. And I think people are in for a rude awakening when they try and handle that next year.
Well, I mean, I think that like every other email from the morning chalk up is about people getting popped for performance enhancing drugs. I think you're probably going to find that some people are literally just going to be like, okay, cool, I'm just going to go all in this year, live like a hermit, pump myself up with as much shit as I can, and then I'm going to try and compete as many of these different sanctionals and make it to the games, and then I will release that ebook and break the internet. But like I think that it would be interesting, for instance, with what you are seeing is those people who are a little bit more confident with making it to the games. I think those people who are in the the upper echelons of the CrossFit Games leaderboard, you are seeing them be very selective and maybe pick out 2 or 3 sanctional events and go forward for that. But like a big thing about that is that if you are an athlete at the higher level of the sport, you don't necessarily need to take the time away from training. You might need to take time off. You might need to take like an off season and things like that, but you don't necessarily need to go through, the sort of general GPP work and accumulation phases that you need to amount in a season. So, a beginner might be looking to like peak maybe once a year or twice a year or something along those lines. And when they do peak, it's not going to take them very long to do that. They can, take anything from say 6 to 3 weeks out of their training, and they can just, focus on sharpening up for CrossFit. Whereas those people who are elite, it's probably going to, not do them well if they take too much time away from those, higher intensity, more competitive, specific training pieces. So they'll probably start to think of a season as more of a, like for instance, a field sports athlete, where it's like, oh, okay, this 4 months is my season. And, obviously they want to peak for the games, but they're probably going to be trying to peak at another couple of points as well around that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you'll find it like Dubai, Granite Games, Rogue Invitational, Wadapalooza, events like that are very, very well established and that did very, very well this year as sanctional events. So what you'll find is that the best athletes will go to those, and then you're just going to get like you're just going to sort of get this residue of this bubble group of athletes that just might make it, might not make it, coming through all of the other sanctional events. But yeah, I mean, I know that sanctional events as well, the main driver behind it is money. And it's like if an event can put the cash behind it to become a sanctional event, they're like very much, oh yeah, cool, go and do that.
Yeah.
I mean, from what I hear, there is not very much communication with Mr. Castro and the rest of the competition organizers. So I think, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, and hopefully these event organizers will figure out a way where they can try to reduce the load on athletes, potentially use the open as like a, whether that, they use that or they sort of collectively use the same data points or the same results to rank athletes and bring them in off the competition from there.
Yeah, I think like you were saying, the top athletes being able to kind of take that time off because they don't need to compete in as many events. They can qualify from their first event and be done. The irony is that they need that off season less than the lower level athletes.
Yeah.
Like those people that are on the fringe, some of them just need like 4 months to actually go and get better. They need to improve. They need to get stronger. They need to improve their muscular endurance, whatever it is. But they're going to be so focused on the events that they just keep trying to compete and trying to compete and trying to compete and never actually getting better as an athlete.
Yeah. Like if you've constantly got those extrinsic like motivators going on, that shit is exhausting. It's just like, it just burns people out. And I think it is important that people do take a little bit of time away from competition just so they can focus on their own thing and they can focus on finding their own groove and developing like that.
It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out into the 2021 season. If sanctioned events start dropping out because they're not well attended, or if athletes start attending less of them because they can't maintain it.
Yeah. I wonder if this McIntyre guy will actually try to legitimately qualify for the games.
He has for the past few years.
Well, he's done the Open, hasn't he?
He's done the Open. His best finish was this year, where he was 1,000th in the world. It's not like he's just jumping into this raw. He's been doing this for a while. He's done the Open the last 3 years. He's been training in a CrossFit gym. He's not just like turning up raw.
He's just doing this to make fucking YouTube videos like everyone else in CrossFit.
Yeah, I mean, I can't fault him for doing what he wants to do. I think it's stupid that he got an invite. I think if he'd have never done the Open, if the Open had clashed with his OCR season and he couldn't do the Open, that's one thing. But, I watched him at Granite Games on a team, and he's doing a snatch ladder, and he's like grinding out a snatch at 225 and getting buried by 245. And it's like, you tell me the last year a games athlete couldn't snatch 245.
I can actually do that because I've used this as a coaching point on several occasions. Jeff someone from the California region, 2016, he put up 220 as a snatch in the max snatch event, and I keep on using it as a coaching point when like I have athletes who are snatching around the same number and they're like, I need to snatch 300 pounds. And I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. Stop, please.
Yeah.
you don't. But yeah, I mean, I get your point. I mean, I think that was, that's...
and the worst thing about that is he's not going to finish last. He's going to be kind of middle of the pack, maybe just below middle.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a justification of, he deserved his invite because he didn't finish last. It's like, well, no. Yeah. He just won. The way the point system works, he won, 3 events or 2 events and finished well in another 1 or 2 events. And that was enough to... You could win 2 events and you don't finish last at the games. You could not compete any other events. If you win 2, you don't finish last.
You just pull a Sam Dancer and just... finish the deadlift, walk the run, finish the deadlift.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not sitting in last. So, just the way the point system works, he's going to perform, or he's going to finish reasonably. And that's going to be used as a justification that he deserved to be there when, frankly, he doesn't. And again, nothing against him, but the idea of inviting him was stupid.
Very true. All right. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap it up there. Hunter, if you're listening to this,
yeah, he's definitely listening to this.
Good on you, man. But screw CrossFit for giving you the invite. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. While you're here, go ahead and head over to your podcast player, subscribe to the show, give it a rating, give it a review, all that good stuff. You can also go ahead and click through to the show notes where you can find out more about us at legionsc.com and also follow us on Instagram at legion.sc.